Without further ado, I have to invite or request Pranab Bardhan, Dr. Pranab Bardhan, who's professor from Berkeley, to really give his keynote address. He's going to be talking about reflections on political economy of New India. Somebody who is absolutely a great thinker from my point of view. I've read his books, I've read his work, very deep thinking, and it really pushes you in terms of really looking at things from a very different perspective. I will not really say much more, but somebody I think possibly is one of the foremost economists or economic thinkers in the world. Dr. Pranab Bardhan, thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you, Amit. Am I audible? Thanks the organizers of this conference for inviting me to give this talk. If you don't mind, I'm going to sit down. I am a political economist, so don't be surprised that I will be commenting on both economic and political assessment of the Indian economy Indian economy and polity in recent years. The other thing I should tell you that I have, I think, 24 slides and I have 25 minutes, so I have to go very fast. And so I decided to avoid charts and diagrams. But I want to emphasize that most of the statements that you will see in the slides, I can back up with data. If you are interested, I'd be happy to discuss with you. So first, the rate of growth per capita, GDP, but in purchasing power parity terms, because I want to compare with other countries, in the last 10 years has been at the annual average rate of 4.3%. Per capita purchasing power parity, this rate is lower than that in China over the last 10 years, Bangladesh, and Vietnam, but better than in Indonesia and Brazil. This growth rate was 6.2% in the previous 10 years, the Manmohan Singh regime. There are obviously many improvements, particularly in road transport, telecommunication, connectivity, and other aspects of economic integration. We are a much more integrated economy now. And its digital infrastructure, particularly payment systems. Though, while direct transfer schemes, digitization of public service delivery bypasses intermediaries, this has its advantages in terms of reducing corruption, can undermine political accountability processes at the local level. At a huge cost to the taxpayers, the banking system has now been largely cleansed of the big burden of bad loans. The insolvency and the bankruptcy code has been a major change, though recovery of loans has been extremely low and marked by long delays. The system is often gamed by the politically connected, and delayed court judgments are often due to evasive actions by defaulting borrowers, even as they continue asset stripping. Large improvements in access to sanitation. The ministry usually tell you, since 2018, India is totally defecation-free. That's not true. Even CAG reports, which are government reports, and household surveys show that only about 70% of the villages are defecation-free, but the ministry goes on saying it's 100%. And there's been extension of banking among the poor, though much less than what the hype about them, both sanitation and banking, about them suggests, as various surveys have shown. Absence of census and official household survey data, occasionally suppressed for a dozen years, has made it difficult to assess the trends in extreme poverty and vulnerability of the population. Only earlier this week, we know about the latest 22-23 household survey. We just have the partial results available. On the basis of that, Niti Aayog CEO has already jumped to the conclusion of declining poverty, overlooking that this survey is not comparable, is significantly incomparable with the earlier survey of 2011-12, differences in sampling design, differences in methods of surveying, differences in methods of estimation. Continuing misery, particularly in small enterprises and the informal sector, accentuated by the disastrous policy of demonetization and then the pandemic and its mismanagement. All this is inadequately reflected in GDP data. In fact, most of the time in newspapers you will see GDP growth rates. Those don't reflect what's happening in the informal sector, because the informal sector, they're only benchmarks. They are changed only periodically. So the informal sector is inadequately reflected in GDP data. How large is the informal sector? Estimates say it will be about 40% of the economy, which is not reflected in the periodic GDP data. Rural real wage rates, both agricultural and non-agricultural, have grown at a much slower rate in the last 10 years than in the previous 10 years. This growth rate was actually negative. Real wage rate fell in the last 5 years. Structural transition from low productivity to high productivity sectors has been largely aborted. New India has not succeeded in resolving this long-standing structural stagnation. In spite of tall promises of 20 million jobs every year, make in India, skill in India, doubling of agricultural income by 2022, etc. Low-skilled entrants to the labor force, nearly 7 million each year, have mainly crowded into the low productivity informal sector, including agriculture. Figures of youth unemployment are alarming, and more importantly, usually people talk about the unemployment figures in a country like India. More important is underemployment and discouraged dropouts from the labor force, mainly for women, but also for men. Increase in self-employment in recent years is likely to be a sign of distress. Quite often, it's in unpaid family jobs. The Indian success stories are mainly in capital or skill-intensive manufacturing and skill-intensive services. The recent emphasis on production-linked incentives is not likely to change this significantly. Manufacturing as a percentage of total employment has over the years remained stagnant, even declining somewhat in the last 5 or 6 years. Extreme centralization of power, mainly in the Prime Minister's office. This damages the incentive and information effects of decentralization. The rhetoric of cooperative federalism has largely been a hoax. vertical fiscal imbalance between the center and states has continued. This has been for many, many decades, it's continued. Today, while the states incur 64% of the total government expenditure, they collect only about 38% of the revenue, much lower in the poorer states. And their borrowing power is, of course, subject to central approval. In the quarter century of 1989 to 2014, with powerful regional political parties and coalition governments in New Delhi, the imbalance in Indian fiscal arrangements were partly corrected through political negotiations. But these corrections were not institutionalized. Now these arrangements are over and largely discarded by power that is over-centralized. Federalism is now battered in various ways. I could tell you about 20 different ways. I'll just, given the shortness of time, I'll just mention 4 or 5. The completely arbitrary and unilateral breaking down of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, now legitimized by the Supreme Court, shows what can happen to any state. Hardly a common phenomenon in federal countries. Governors in non-BJP states regularly used to harass and hinder elected governments. Centralization of welfare schemes, bypassing state governments and giving credit only to the Prime Minister, sometimes with his photograph attached, have weakened state-level welfareist chief ministers, including those belonging to the ruling party. Even on welfare schemes only partly funded by the center funds, often denied to the opposition states on flimsy grounds like branding. State subjects like law and order, agriculture, and public health, often bypassed by unilateral central actions. For example, misuse of investigative agencies to hound opposition leaders, wanton use of controversial laws like the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act against minorities and dissenters, arbitrary farm laws rammed through Parliament without any discussion. During the pandemic, use of the Central Disaster Management Act that did not take into account the varied stages of preparation and incidence of the disease in different states. Imposition of central laws in education and labor with very little consultation with the states in areas that belong to the concurrent list in the Constitution. Even on a concurrent subject like criminal law, the recent 3 major criminal laws were passed without any consultation with the states. So I've given you some examples of how federalism is being battered. It should be said at the same time that the state governments have been somewhat complicit in the ruling party's attempts to wreck the federal structure. I could give you many examples. One example, the reaction of the states to the breaking up of the Jammu and Kashmir state. They didn't realize this could happen to their state, but yet hardly any protest. Many state governments have themselves been delinquent in devolving power and finance to the panchayat and municipal levels. The poor performance of sub-provincial local bodies in the last mile delivery of public services and facilities, particularly compared to China, is partly attributable to this. I mean, I must just cite one dramatic difference between China and India in this respect. In China, of the total government expenditure in the country, 55% is at the sub-provincial level, municipal, township, and village level. What's the percentage in India? 3%. In India's major cities, urban planning and development projects are designed and run by agencies controlled by state governments with no accountability to the elected municipal bodies, leading to a great deal of misalignment and dysfunctionality. Reform of the local tax structure is missing. Local property taxes as percentage of GDP are among the lowest in the world, much lower than, for example, I'm not talking about Europe, which is much higher there, for example, Brazil, Turkey, or the Philippines. We have now a concentrated enclave economy. The World Inequality Report suggests that the top 1% of the households in India now hold about 33% of total wealth. In 1991, that percentage was 16. And the bottom half of the population holds about 6%. In 1991, it was 9%. This wealth, by the way, does not include items of human capital like education. If one crudely measures inequality in the distribution of human capital in the form of, say, years of schooling of the adult population, India is one of the world's most unequal countries in terms of education, much worse than even Latin American countries like Mexico, Brazil, or Argentina. Those countries are supposed to be among the most unequal. And this, of course, does not include the quality of learning on which we know a lot of data exists. Even most recently, we've seen data that high school and college-going young people, they sometimes cannot do simple division, grade 3 education, etc. The pattern of high inequality generates a Latin American-style enclave economy, where a limited sector caters to an affluent elite demanding relatively capital-intensive and skill-intensive goods, whereas much of the general economy, and primarily rural and informal, suffers from insufficient demand and underutilization of capacity, and thus low private investment and employment. This you can see sectoral demand patterns. Mass consumer goods are much less growing than the luxury goods. What about corporate concentration? There are data now. For example, the 20 most profitable firms generated 14% of total corporate profits in 1990. In 2022, it's 80%. Of course, you might say the composition of firms may have changed. It's not the same firm. It turns out, in the last decade, it's almost the same firms. Evidence suggests that these profits were mainly due to market power. The standard Herfindahl-Hirschman index of industrial concentration is generally very high, particularly so for aluminium, aviation, commercial and passenger vehicles, tires, copper, paints, steel, and telecom. Viral Acharya has estimated that in the period 2016-21, the concentration, particularly in the top 5 business groups, has increased sharply, largely through mergers and acquisitions. These big 5 conglomerates are in over 40 NIC 2-digit sectors, covering much of the non-financial corporate India. They are sheltered from foreign competition through a protective trade regime. This may be good for profits, not for productivity. It's very interesting. India has now a large number of dollar billionaires, but hardly any global brand. India's current political economic regime is thus one of crony oligarchy. Favors and special regulatory dispensations tend to be reserved for select big firms. There are several examples of rules and goalposts changed midstream to help the cronies. According to estimates by The Economist magazine, India's share of only the billionaires' wealth delivered from what they call rent-tick or crony sectors rose from 29 to 40%, 43% between 2016, in just 5 years, 2016 and 21, rose from 29 to 43%. One should recognize crony capitalism is corrupt capitalism. Those who consider the current regime as less corrupt than the earlier regime often overlook this. Even by the flawed Corruption Perception Index of Transparency International, India's rank was 85 in 2014 among 180 countries. In 2023, the last date for its data available, it is 93. In other words, 92 countries in the world are less corrupt than India. Central agencies like CBI, ED, etc. are weaponized to bring corruption charges against opposition or dissenting groups. But if you join the ruling party, you are mostly exempt from such charges. So even the same leaders who have been castigated by the ruling party as extremely corrupt, as soon as they join, corruption charges are not pursued, and therefore corruption declines. The other side of a corrupt political economic system is in effect a quid pro quo process. It is widely inferred that big money from favored corporate houses flows to fill the ruling party's coffers, largely under the ingenious con game known as electoral bonds with no limits or public disclosure requirements. Recently, Supreme Court considered that unconstitutional after 6 years of damaging consequences of electoral bonds. Since some of the conglomerates also own media companies, they also contribute to the ruling party by carrying government propaganda full of hype and misinformation. With the ruling party's near monopoly on the media and election funds and increasing control on the composition of the election commission, elections are not on a level playing field. Decay of democratic institutions has been going on for some time, but its pace much accelerated in the last 10 years. However much we shout from the rooftop that we are the mother of democracy. Press freedom and the freedom of debate and criticize are vanishing. There's a climate of fear. There's a recent CSDS survey in which 2/3 of the respondents said they are scared to express their opinion online. Jailing of opposition leaders, journalists, and dissenters, bullying and lynching of minorities, and bulldozer justice meted out to the poor by thuggish government officials and vigilantes are now routine. While opposition parties are often dynastic, I have to say the ruling party is monarchic, with shameless cult of personality. And this is my last but one side. Essence of democracy is in civil liberties and political rights, including respect for minority rights, more than elections. Even centrist media like The Economist and the Financial Times now call India an illiberal democracy, which to me is an oxymoron. Democracy that's illiberal is not a real democracy. In essence of democracy is missing. It's my last slide. I have a book, A World of Insecurity, Democratic Disenchantment in Rich and Poor Countries, which discusses the erosion of democracy in India in the context of similar erosion elsewhere. With weak and crumbling institutions, the sway of merchants of hype and hate, and a popular hankering for strong leaders, the Indian democratic erosion is likely to be severe and long-lasting. Things will get even worse if the new AI technology is abused in the form of state surveillance and deepfake misinformation. So in my judgment, if you ask me, in this respect, the elephant is moving backward. Thank you.